Anyway, we're on to our next session, which is going to be a set of interviews. So I'd like to introduce Jonathan Arnold, who's going to be question master. Jonathan is the director of the Communities and Partnership framework within Canterbury Diocese, and he's going to be interviewing Paula, who's the curate at Tunstall and Bredgar Benefice, but she's also worked with Witchling Church, where she continues to help them, and they've achieved a silver award. They're working towards gold. We have Jill Musgrove, who is coordinator of the Eco Group at St John's United Reformed Church at Marsh Green near Edenbridge. And we have Joyce, priest in charge at St Martin's Church in Maidstone. So welcome, and over to you, Jonathan, for questions. Just to say, we're going to turn off the chat during this so that Jonathan has the opportunity to ask questions of our three interviewees. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Teresa, and thanks to everyone for what's been an excellent morning with some wonderful talks and very stimulating ideas. It's really good for me as Director of Communities and Partnerships in the Diocese of Canterbury, which really focuses on social and environmental justice, to have these three wonderful panelists with us this morning, because as we've already heard, there's a lot of overlap between the subject of environment and justice. But we have representatives here of three quite diverse churches in terms of their locations, rural, town, the type of buildings, and the journey that these PCCs, congregations and clergy have been on. So it's very, very good to be able now to talk about not just about how this happened and solar panels and heating sources and so on, but how it impacts the worship and community of the whole church. So can I just start by asking a very basic question, really, is tell us a little bit about your church and why you wanted to start on this eco church journey. Can I start with maybe Paula?
Yeah, sure. So the church that I've been accompanying really through this last year since I've been in curacy elsewhere, Witchling Church, it's a very isolated church. In fact, it's sort of designated as an isolated church within the diocese. It's on the North Downs, and it's surrounded on four sides. Woodland on two sides, field to the other side, and a grass field sort of in front of it, really. So it has its challenges. The church itself doesn't have any electricity, it has no water, so everything that you need in the church has to be brought there, and that gives you a wonderful indication of how much you are using. It's lit by gas lights, and that is bottled gas. To give you an idea of our fuel costs for the year, it's around £50. So I'm sure a lot of people are quite jealous of that, but we are pretty much a summer church because of the challenges of the place itself. Again, its location, we can see creation in any direction you look, and it's a fantastic place to be. And so really that was the kickstart, really, the motivation to look at undertaking the Eco Church award system. We were already having different surveys happening at the church, wildlife surveys, wildflower surveys, bat, moth surveys, things like that, undertaken by other organisations. So we thought, well, let's embrace that and actually see how we can go forward with the Eco Church process.
Gosh, thanks very much indeed. That sounds incredibly rural and wonderful. And perhaps I can contrast that with Joyce in Maidstone. What was your impetus, and what's your church like?
It couldn't be any more different, I think, than Paula's church. We're an urban estate church, so we're located at the heart of several low-income housing estates. The environment is really not a priority. It's housing, unemployment, a bit of crime and single parents. So it's the struggles of life and poverty that impact our environment. And the church community is part of that. So creation care was not, we didn't engage with that at all. We were primarily concerned with fundraising for parish share and worship and developing links with our 5 primary schools. So we started from scratch, really. And I agree with Paula, you need something, you need a trigger to begin the journey. And for me personally, it was discovering climate change and that human beings are causing it. And when that message hits home to your heart and your bones, you can't ignore it. You have to do something about it. So my challenge was, how do I get a church rolling on this journey from zero? How do I convince them of its relevance, its importance, and its impact on future generations? And I really prayed hard about that. How do I, even start talking about that? And I asked the next question, which was simply, what's important to this community? And apart from raising funds, it is worship. So I began the journey to Eco Church through worship. And that opened a lot of doors.
That's really, really interesting. And Witchling and St Martin Maidstone have got to the Silver Award stage, which is absolutely brilliant, and 2 contrasting churches there. So Jill, what's it like for you in Marsh Green? Because you're at Gold Award level with the United Reformed there. What's your church like, and what was the start of your journey like?
Well, our church is very different. Well, there's somewhere between the two, really. We're a small rural church, but I'm built in about 1882 for the brickyard workers, and a school was built at the same time alongside. It's set on a lovely village green. It's got fields round, cattle grazing behind, and so on. We inherited, or I should say, we're only about a couple of miles away from Edenbridge, which is a town of 10,000 people. So we're not isolated in the same way as your first church. The school sadly closed recently. Well, no, not recently, actually. It's quite a long time ago. About nearly 10 years ago, we inherited the playing field because the church owned the school, or synod now. And so we have been gradually converting the monoculture playing field to a nature reserve and wildflower meadow. How we sort of started on the journey, ours is very much a bottom up, I think. Members of the congregation for 30, 40 years have been involved in Make Poverty History, yes, One World Week, all these sort of things. And we became an eco congregation back in quite some time ago, 2013, I think. And then that evolved into Eco Church, and we became got the Gold Award in 2019. So it's very much congregation led, and I think and our motivation is, well, it's, I think, fairly clear. It's if you love your neighbour, as you mentioned earlier, you have to do something about it. And so I think that's where we are. We're a different sort of church, United Reformed Church, and we're the United Reformed Church for Edenbridge, as well as the little village of Marsh Green. We don't have an Anglican church in Marsh Green, so we are the Church of Marsh Green. They're technically in the parish of Edenbridge, but they're very generous, they share it.
Thanks very much indeed. And these are really interesting starting points. And I will just say although the chat is turned off and we don't have time for a sort of technical discussion about how all of these things happened, if after the webinar is finished, Teresa and Karen will share their email addresses. And if you want to get in touch with Paula, Joyce or Jill and find out more about how they did this, you will be able to contact them through Teresa and Karen afterwards. I'll say that again later. But Jill, you talked there about a bottom-up approach and a congregational approach, and that's where I want to move on to now, if that's okay, about how did that come about, and how did you engage with your, in Anglican terms, the PCC or your sort of core group and your congregation? How did that happen? It sounds as though in your case it was organic, but then I'll move on to Joyce and Paula afterwards.
Yes, we're a sort of more democratic denomination. Church meeting is what makes the decisions, and so the church has been very supportive. Although actually getting people to act on their support is harder, but so original decisions are made by church meeting, and since then it's been, I don't know, a dripping on a stone approach. It's been going on for years. Persistence, sort of trying to encourage and persuade people. We try and use humour. We try not to be too negative. That's quite difficult sometimes. So it's through worship, your newsletter, eco tips, children's work. We do a service, an eco service. We always have a handout for people to take home. So that's one of the ones we had, about turning over a new leaf. And we have open afternoons in the nature reserve because the church runs teas in the summer, so on Saturdays. So we just keep going,
Right,
and try and persuade people.
yeah.
And it sort of works.
Thanks very much. It sounds great. Joyce, what was it like for you, especially at the beginning? Because it sounds like there was a vision, but how did it work with PCC and Congregation?
I started first with the Congregation. So started through worship and used as much creativity as possible. So we had, in August, we had a complete summer series on creation care, where I asked lots of different people, visitors, to come in and talk. And then, so I agree with Jill in the drip, drip, drip approach. That's exactly what we did as well. And then after that, I partnered with people like Christian Aid, Tier Fund, USPG. So we had Christian Aid in particular came in, and we did joint talks and meetings on climate change in particular. And then I used the Advent and Lent reflection time to focus on the environment through Tier Fund. And that in turn led to a photographic exhibition taking place in church on the environment with Christian Aid. And we extended that to the local primary schools. We partnered with them. They would provide artwork, for example, for a conference or harvest Christmas in church. And one school offered to help us create an eco garden. So that was lovely. We worked with them on that. And by that time, the diocese had formed its own environmental committee, which I joined, and I sort of drip fed feedback from them. So by the time I approached PCC, the Congregation were very familiar with creation care. I then introduced Eco Church, Church Magazine, talks, leaflets, etc. So it was quite easy to then move PCC to engage with Eco Church, and we appointed an environmental officer who became the voice of the environment in our community. It was a long journey, but it was good. It was productive.
It sounds like there's a process of education and communication, quite a long process of that before you actually get to appointing an officer and somebody. Yeah, that's really interesting. Was that the same for you, Paula, or slightly different for for your rural place?
Yeah, so slightly different perhaps, because in fact our church doesn't have an immediate community around it. I mean, it literally is in the middle of nowhere, and so we've got about 150 residents in Witchling, and they're very spread out farmsteads, as it has been historically. So in fact our congregation is drawn from elsewhere. And as such, it's quite transient. So you'll get people visiting, coming through the area. So that's sort of where we are with that. So it makes an actual focus for the congregation quite a challenge, in fact. But what we have got is a core group, a steering group in our case, that look after the church, like a PCC, and they were all on board with that. And actually, it's through using those as the core members of this group taking it forward that we've managed to roll things out. What we have actually explored and done, and really how we've got our bronze and silver, is to engage with those other groups that we already had. So our survey groups, so our wildlife groups, our, as I say, sort of bat and moth survey evenings, and drawn people from there actually that have become the mouthpieces of the church, and they've spread, you know, that all the things that we've been doing, they've spread that out, and that's been really amazing. So our congregation, as I say, is fairly transient, but our message is really out there. And so we see our congregation perhaps in much wider terms. You know, these are the people who are evangelizing, if you like. They're the ones that are spreading this news about care for creation. Which is it's a joy to see and witness. It truly is.
That's amazing. Yeah, that really does broaden it out to a huge area of people who are interested in environmental issues, who are passing through and engaging with what you're doing there. That sounds fascinating. So I want to ask all of you now, really, what have been the greatest sort of highlights, the high moments of this journey? And what have been the real challenges? What's been the real struggle in all of this? Jill, how has that been for you?
Well, I've talked to some of the others in the eco group as well about this. I think there's been some big things which have been very sort of satisfying, like when we got PV panels on the church roof. We're not listed, which is useful for us. And so that's it's really good, because that not only everybody loves that because it brings in an income, as well as giving us free electricity. So that was a really, really positive thing. And then we're able to use the income from that to actually move further. That we tithe from it to an environmental charity each year. Wow. And so that sort of thing's been really good. But also the little things, just watching children sort of doing identification things of butterflies and things in the nature reserve. When you actually see sort of people actually developing a bit more of a passion for creation. I mean, the flip side of that is you sometimes wonder why on earth people aren't more enthusiastic. So that moves us to a more negative. But it's, yes, changed attitudes.
Is there a particular challenge in going for the gold award? Is there a hurdle there?
We have a big challenge actually, and that's a rainwater harvesting system. Not actually in order to get to gold, I think because we have more evolved, and there are so many different aspects to it, but we have had nothing but problems with our rainwater harvest system for loo flushing. In fact, I've got to go back onto mains water for that for a bit. We hope we'll be, if anyone has good advice, knows companies that really know what they're doing, don't do it unless you've got somebody who knows what they're doing. Right.
Okay, that's something we could catch up on after this webinar then, if we can be in touch. How about you, Paula? How's it been moving into silver, and what were the challenges and the highs there?
Yeah, I think the highs of the whole process is just to see not only the flourishing of creation around us and how we've managed our land in a slightly different way, but also that spiritual flourishing as well. And I think that's been really important, a really important part of this. And we've managed to create 2 separate groups as well that engage with us, and one of which is Wild Church, which has been a youth project. Sadly, it's actually stopped at the moment because of COVID and many other things. But that has been a joy to be involved with, really highlighting that care for creation and getting the kids on board with it, which has just been fantastic. But also a new monastic community as well that has now had to be online during the pandemic. But again, having that main focus of care for creation. So in a way, it's sort of creating the congregation, if you like, based at the church, which has been really interesting and a joy.
So you've started a new monastic community at the church or around the...
Yeah, it's we would actually come to the church, we'd camp over a weekend or something like that, and just engage with creation and with sort of daily offices, and it was just been an amazing blend of things to do. But yeah, I mean the challenges, I think, and the challenges of probably most people here is the building. Sorry, Helen, to bring buildings up again, but I think that really is the challenge. It's a listed building, it's an ancient building. It's how do you go forward with that? And I think also with limited resources, we're all strapped for cash as well, and it's a difficult thing to overcome. But actually also the survey in a lot of ways is a challenge, poses its own challenge, in that we're a fairly unique case, okay, at Witchling, but there's a lot of things on the survey which you sort of get marked down for not having. It's like the floodlights, for example. That was one of my bugbears. We have no floodlight plans because we have no electricity. That should be a positive thing. But I have to say that actually on the survey there is a space for you to put your own comments, and that is so important, because then we can have the conversations. Look, we don't do this, but actually we do that, and that is a really important part of this going forward. For anyone that's looking at the survey thinking, oh well, that's never going to happen, I can't do that, put your comments down. It's so important.
That's a really good tip there. Thanks very much. Brilliant. And Joyce, what are the highs and lows for you?
I'm just going to pick up again where Paula left off with the survey. That can be quite daunting when you first begin to do it, but just persevere, push through it, because for us it proved to be the foundation of everything we have done since, because the Eco Church survey gave us a holistic perspective on church life, and it took us beyond the building into the international world and into other aspects. So yes, there are a lot of things in the survey that don't apply, that you can't apply, but there is also a lot you can do without costing a lot of money. So you've just got to do the survey and get on with it, and it does lead to things that you can do and change. So I'm very grateful for the survey. I suppose that one of the joys of this whole Eco Church journey has been how all of us in this community have moved from zero to completely embracing the climate change problem and how to tackle it, as well as other environmental issues. We've got a new vocabulary. We talk about social justice issues, we talk about sustainability, and a wider perspective, I think. Another joy has been tree planting. We're in a very hard concrete area, but we have a preschool nearby, so we got some free trees, some saplings from the Woodland Trust. We planted about 15 in the front garden, and we gave 3 away to each of our primary schools as part of our legacy to the young. the greatest challenge, we also set up a deanery environmental group, so that's been another achievement. The biggest challenge, I think, it's so hard to encourage other churches to engage with eco-church. That is a huge challenge. But we're doing our best in the diocese to push that, because it is the means to going beyond the building and other things. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but just can I ask you all in a couple of words to say what your next focus is on? What's the next big challenge in just a couple of words? Joyce, what's your next?
We're selling one building to make the main church, environmentally friendly, sustainable for the next generation, and we are embarking upon the quinquennial to launch that renovation, reordering of church.
Wow. And what about for you, Paula? What's the next thing?
Well, the next big thing, I guess, at Witchling is going for gold, and we are nearly there. We're there in every particular topic except the buildings, where we're still on silver. But again, I think conversations can be had around that.
Brilliant. And what about you, Jill? What's next after gold?
Well, one practical thing is that we are planning a pond in the nature reserve, and there's a preschool that meets at the church as well, so that very much is involved in using the premises. So that's a practical thing. And then, but really, we need to keep on going. We've only got one planet, so it's back to keeping on. And not giving, trying to stay positive.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your journey. It's been absolutely fascinating. And as I say, if you want to find out more detail about exactly what went on in these three churches, then Teresa and Karen's details will be available after the webinar, and you can get in touch with these three wonderful places. And thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand over now as Bishop Rose completes our morning. Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt just before we go to Bishop Rose. So thank you very, very much to Jill and Paula and Joyce for sharing your experience. And thank you to Jonathan for being our interviewer today. Our time together is coming to an end. As Jonathan said, we will be sharing lots of information over the next week. We're going to share the films when we're slicing them up, so you don't have to sit and watch all 3 hours at once. So once we've sliced them up for you, we'll make those available, and we're trying to share all of the presentations and resources and links that have been shared in the chat and by the speakers today. If you're in the areas of Kent, Bromley and Bexley, so the dioceses of Rochester or Canterbury in Anglican speak, you are very welcome to join the Eco Church Kent Facebook group, which is a network of other people on this journey and can only be improved by being bigger. So everyone in the area is welcome to join that. It's an ecumenical group. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Bishop Rose, Bishop of Dover, to send us on our journey today.
Thank you very, very much. That has been a feast this morning. Thank you to the organizers. And I also want to say thank you to those who have taken the time to be part of this Zoom conference, or whatever it is that we wanted to call it. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. So much has been said already this morning, and I don't want this just to be lots more words. So I think I just want to highlight really a couple of things. And firstly, the first thing I want to say is a real reminder that what we're talking about, what we've been talking about this morning, the whole area of our climate, concern for our climate and our environment, that this is actually a gospel imperative. This is not a hippie liberal stuff that, you know, for those of us or some of us who might like it, will just sort of dip into it when we feel like it. This is a gospel imperative. And by underlining that this is a gospel imperative, I think the next thing I want to say is that this is not to be put in a box. This whole subject area is not to be put in a box that is connected to the sort of political stuff or, you know, whatever other names we want to give it. This has got to be integrated in our lives, in our communities. We, the same way well, I certainly do get excited about telling people about Jesus. I want us to get really excited about sharing this information, this message with our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, our friends, because it is from our enthusiasm about the meaning and purpose of this that we're going to start growing this whole area to do with the environment and climate control. I spoke to say that it is a gospel imperative. Let's be reminded that this actually comes under, it makes up the 5th mark of mission in the life of the church. So we have 5 marks of mission that we adhere to. This is the 5th mark of mission. And in this 5th mark of mission, it is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. That is a charge for us all as the people of God. And perhaps if I could wrap it up in one word, the one word that I would want to wrap it up in is the word generosity. Generosity. For God so loved the world that he gave this amazing gift that God has given to us. And so we, having received this gift, must now ask, what do we do with it? How do we treat it? How do we care for it? How do we make sure that we share it in a way that others, and you saw clips from the different presenters that showed the impact that was happening in other parts of the world. So how do we live in the world, this part of the world where we are, in a way that enables others to also thrive on the gift, the wonderful, generous gift that God has given to us? That is a challenge for us. And I just want to quickly remind us of the gospel story in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12 and verse 16. I won't read it word for word because you already know the story. It's the story of the man who, when he looked at what he had accumulated, he thought, wow, how terrific I am. You know what? I'm just going to build bigger barns. I'm going to build bigger barns. I want to store more of what I have. There was no sense of, wow, look what God has blessed me with. How might I share this with others? How might I give back? How might I ensure that I'm not just using up more and more land for myself? Advertisers spend millions enticing us to think that, that if we buy more stuff, we will be happier, we will be more fulfilled, we will be more comfortable. That's not true. So how do we respond to that constant pressure to accumulate stuff? Because actually, it is in the accumulation of more and more that we then impinge on the environment. And we need to make that connection. So I want to encourage you, the generosity with which God has blessed us with, let us also live generously by the way we relate to God's world and all God's people and everything. So let's just pause for a moment. I'm going to say a few words of scripture, and then there will be a slide up on the screen where I will invite you to affirm together our commitment to care actively for God's creation. Words from Hosea. The land mourns and all who dwell on it languish. The beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and even the fish of the sea are perishing. And from Psalm 63, the earth is scorched with fire, the air polluted, and the waters choked with waste. The ice melts and the seas rage. The waters surge and floods devastate the land. The water springs are silent and the streams run dry. The green places are a dry land where there is no water. From Isaiah 64, the fertile ground is exhausted. The land has become a parched and windswept wasteland. The holy cities have become a wilderness. Zion has become a desolation. And so from Psalm 80, turn us again, O Lord. Turn us again, O Lord, and come to our help. So let us together, finally, affirm our commitment to care actively for God's creation. Let's say these words together. Lord of life and giver of hope, we pledge ourselves to care for creation, to reduce our waste, to live sustainably, and to value the rich diversity of life. May your wisdom guide us, that life in all its forms may flourish and may be faithful in voicing creation's praise. May the commitment we have made this day be matched by our faithful living. And in the words of Jesus to those whom he spoke to, go and do likewise. Amen.